All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, good afternoon. Today is Friday, November 6th. I'm Donna Will, Professional Development Coordinator for the Developmental Disabilities Administration. We welcome you to the Person-Centered Plan Development and Authorization Guidance session. So we have several presenters for today, which include Patricia Sestoki, Director of Programs, Rhonda Workman, Director of Federal Programs. We have regional directors, Kimberly Gescheidel, who is Regional Director for Eastern Shore, Onesta Duke for Southern, Nick Burton for Central, Kathy Marshall for Western, and Linda Yale, Deputy Regional Director for Western, Mary Ann Kane-Bresci, who is Director of Family Supports. Before we begin, I'd like to go over a few things about the webinar. All participants are in listen-only mode. We have 3 handouts for this webinar, and you can find those in the handout section in the panel to your right. They're also on the DDA website, and we are recording the webinar, and we will be posting the YouTube link on the DDA website. Questions can be typed in the question or chat box in the webinar panel, and we will get to those after each of the segment presentations. So now I'd like to introduce Patricia Sestoki. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Donna, and thank you. Happy Friday, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I just want to take this opportunity to thank all of you for sharing what's working and what we can improve within our person-centered development authorization process here at DDA. Today's webcast was created based on the operational procedure guidance we provided on October 1st, 2020, and the frequently asked questions after the guidance went out. So thank you so much for your feedback. This presentation was designed based on the guidance and from the perspective of what we are hearing and getting at the regional offices. We hope today's training provides additional clarity on the guidance, resources, and expectations so that you are able to serve the people you support in creating the approval and authorization of a robust person-centered plans. Today, Rhonda Workman will kick us off with an introduction and then close us off with a summary. Nick Burton, can you go to the previous slide, please? Nick Burton is going, and Mary Ann Kane-Bresci is going to talk to you about the pre-planning and discussions. They're going to share some really awesome information about their pre-planning. Linda Yale is going to talk about the development of the PCP. Onesta Duke is going to lead us into the approval process. And then Kim Gescheidel is going to talk about the authorization. Please know that we'll open up for a few questions after each topic is discussed. And then towards the end, if time is allotted, we will open it up for further questions so that we can try to provide as many answers as possible. Today's presentation is mainly to continue the discussions that we're having of how we approve, review, and authorize the plan and what role all of us play, because all of us are a critical part of this process. So Rhonda, will you lead us off, please? Next slide.
Yes, thank you. So just to kind of regroup and summarize what our topic is today, the DDA created the Person-Centered Plan Development and Authorization Standard Operating Procedures to support our stakeholders. We created this process, which includes a comprehensive review of the pre-planning, development, approval, and authorization processes, which are used for all initial PCPs, annual PCPs, and revised PCPs. Information utilizing a variety of tools, such as our Charting the Life course, Detailed Service Authorization tool, Cost Detail tool, and others, help to facilitate that successful, robust, and timely person-centered planning and implementation. Since originally sharing the guidance in October, we have posted frequently asked questions on October 26th, and today have posted 3 updated guidance, including the revised PCP development and authorization guidance with some additional clarification, the revised service authorization and provider billing documentation, and also a revised cost detail tool to support people in self-direction and others. These are all located on the dedicated person-centered planning page, where there's the link here on the slide that you can access. Next slide, please. So utilizing those principles and tools of charting the life course, the detailed service authorization tool, and cost detail tool, this is going to help to support communication, service request, authorization of payments, which are all essential as we are operating in both the PCIS2 and the LTSS Maryland systems. Today, you're going to hear some more information about the critical support that these tools can have in the PCP planning and development and approval process. Nick and Mary Ann will be sharing some additional information in the upcoming slides. Next slide, please. So just a reminder that on October 1st, we also shared communication through our constant contact related to the discontinuation of the modified service funding plan processes. This process of discontinuation became effective October 15. So any updates or changes based on a person's assessed need to their person-centered plan are now being facilitated by the person's coordinator of community services via a PCP annual update, and as needed, revisions processes in the LTSS system. In other words, a revised PCP. Next slide, please. By transitioning from our legacy modified service funding plan process to the PCP annual update and revision processes, we will be successfully moving forward in our goal to create a person-driven system. There are obviously some additional benefits to this transition as well, including greater team collaboration, planning, flexibility of the plan year to decrease the need for revised PCPs throughout the year, increased efficiencies in submitting, reviewing, and approving changes in the person-centered plan, and streamlines our process to ensure that the person-centered plan is a living document reflecting the person as a whole throughout the year. I'd now like to turn it over to Nick Burton and Mary Ann King-Bresci to talk to us about PCP pre-planning. Next slide, please.
Hello, everybody. This is Nick. We're going to talk about the pre-planning portion of the PCP process. And I think that it's really that first step in the PCP process, whether the initial, the annual, or revisions, it's that initial conversation that the team is having to plan for the development of the PCP. And to kick us off, Mary Ann is actually going to talk about how to utilize and incorporate the life course tools that Rhonda mentioned earlier in her part of the presentation to kind of kick us off and how we start talking about this pre-planning process. So next slide. Mary Ann.
My apologies. Good afternoon, everyone. Let's talk about pre-planning. Well, it begins first with the belief that all people have the right to live, love, work, play, and pursue their aspirations in the community. Gone is the day when we were only concerned about the person's health and safety. While these are critical, we know that people lead whole lives made up of specific, connected, and integrated life domains that are essential to a good quality of life. Some of these domains, as you see in the medallion in front of you, include relationships, employment, community involvement, lifelong learning, and in general, a sense of purpose. And we also know that people engage these and engage their lives according to those things that are of interest to them and are important to them and their ability to do so. So when we engage the person-centered, the pre-planning process and the person-centered planning process, the person determines their vision for their good life and is at the center of its planning, all of which is done, of course, through the person-centered planning process. And it begins with a conversation between the person and their family and other PCP team members about those things that are important to and for the person and what they want for their lives, and leads ultimately to a discussion and identifying their needs, and then working with the person and the team to identify resources, supports, and services that will ultimately support him or her to live their good life. And not just through DDA supports and services, but through integrated supports and services as well. And we'll talk more about that in just a few moments. Next slide, please.
All right, so I wanted to talk a little bit about the purpose of the PCP, right? So we sit down, we're talking about the PCP process, and we're talking about the pre-planning portion of that, but what is the purpose of the PCP? Well, I think simply put, the PCP is really a blueprint for a person's life. It's not static and it changes, just as our needs and our wants change. That's the same for the individuals in our system that have a PCP. I think it's important to understand and remember and just reiterate throughout this process that the person is always at the center of their PCP. And the person should be guiding all aspects of their PCP. The PCP is their plan, it's about their life, and it reflects their choices. And I think, it's important to remember also the PCP is not the provider's PCP, but it is a guide for providers in how, when, and where the person would like to receive their services. Similarly, the PCP isn't the CCS's. However, it does guide the CCS in identifying resources, monitoring those services, monitoring those goals, monitoring those outcomes, and advocating on behalf of the person. I think next slide, please. I think also it's important to talk about who is on the PCP team. So again, like we've said before, the person is at the center of and directs their PCP process. There is no plan without that person. And Marianne, given your role and your experience, do you want to talk a little bit about the person's family, friends, and advocates that may be a part of the PCP team?
Absolutely. Thank you, Nick. Yes, the person's family, friends, and advocates assist the person and the team to identify the person's needs, wants, and if necessary, to help communicate what they might be to the CCS and the provider. In addition, families, what's so important about families and other people that know the person well, is that they often provide great context and history for the person, but that they often are, and they continue to provide necessary and ongoing natural and or paid support. So they really are a critical member of the team.
Thanks, Marianne. So obviously the person, their family, friends, advocates, those are all PCP team members. There's also a couple other critical PCP team members. One is the CCS. And the CCS is that person that supports the person in facilitating and coordinating the PCP process, including the pre-planning process. And that pre-planning process should really start happening about 90 days before the PCP is due. That gives the CCS time to work with the person, their family, and the chosen providers that the individual has chosen to really start thinking through the goals and the needs of the person in the next year, utilizing tools from the life course tools. It also allows the team to really start putting in some thoughtful processes as for how they want to move forward. And of course, the other critical team members on the PCP team are providers. They're great advocates on the front lines for people, supporting them in meeting their needs and wants and collaborating with PCPs to ensure that the right supports are in place. And they are, as the other members, critical in helping the person communicate and identify their good life. Next slide. So why is pre-planning so important? Why do we ask that the team sit down and start connecting 90 days prior to the PCP being finalized and submitted? Well, we do that because we've mentioned the PCP is a blueprint for what the person wants for their life. It's important to ensure that the time and energy is invested in helping create that blueprint. So again, the person can live their personally defined good life. The pre-planning portion is also so important because it encourages collaboration among team members. And it also helps build trust among the team to ensure everyone's working towards the same goal and everyone's working to ensure the person is at the center of the PCP to ensure their needs and wants are met and living their best life that they choose. The PCP is an iterative process. It's continual. It happens every year. The PC team formally comes together, regroups, and fine-tunes that blueprint each year, each time there's a revision. So the pre-planning process of the PC isn't a one and done. That should always be happening every year before the annual PCP. And I would encourage you to use elements of the pre-planning also when you're talking about PCP revisions. I know life gets busy and everyone has a lot on their plates, but the PCP and the processes associated with it are at the heart of what we do. It's a reflection of the person, their aspirations, and the support they need to live their best life. And it's critical that we take that time to help build a robust plan. The pre-planning really allows the team to come together, talk about the past year, talk about the plan, make adjustments. As you all know, there's a lot of tasks involved in the PCP process, and it's important not to rush them so that everybody has the right information to make informed choices, particularly the person about their life. The focus areas in the PCP are great for prompting for the person, their family, and the team to think about what the good life looks like. Next slide. Marianne,
Okay.
did you want to talk about important too?
I would love to talk about important too. So, you know, a good way, I love the trajectory. So the Charting a Life course trajectory is a wonderful tool to be used to facilitate the conversation you will have with the person and other family members and team members. It helps to identify those things that are important to the person and for them, those things that they like to do and don't like to do, the things that they want in their lives and those that they don't. And that's as critical as those things that they do want in their lives. The trajectory helps to, as you begin to identify those important things for folks, it helps to create a vision and build that vision and articulate a vision that the person or the family member may not have been able to do so before. So it really facilitates the conversation. In addition, what I love about the trajectory is that in this particular one, it talks about past experiences that the person may have had that have either supported them if they've been able to articulate a vision in that vision and living their good life, or those experiences that they've had that have pointed them into a negative direction. And it also begins to, as you have this conversation, identify those things they're going to need, and not just resources, supports, and services, but experiences and skills that they'll need as they move in their life. And so in addition to all of that, it really facilitates not just the conversation, but the identification and the planning of resources, supports, and services, and things they need to do next in their life. And in the end, what I love about it, I think it quickly, fairly simply, really captures the essence of who the person is, and those things that they want and need in their lives. And that in turn needs to be captured in the person-centered plan. Next slide.
So I want to talk a little bit about important too. I think, Marianne just did a nice job talking about how to use the life course tools to talk about what's important to and for a person. And I think when we sit down and we all start to, when the PCP starts to come together, it's really important to talk about those important for issues. So what does the person need to be successful? What is needed to ensure the person is healthy? What is needed to ensure the person is safe? And the pre-planning phase of the PCP is a really great time for the team to complete and review the applicable assessments. Two you're all probably familiar with are the HRST and the CIS, but that doesn't mean there aren't other assessments, professional assessments, or other tools to help the team get information to inform the planning and decision making during the pre-planning and through the development of the PCP. The HRST in particular is a really fantastic tool that helps the team identify health and safety risks. The team should use that tool and needs to use that tool to identify risks and make sure those are documented in the PCP. We want to make sure that risks are identified in the PCP so that the team and the person can talk about and determine mitigation efforts to ensure health and safety throughout the year. We understand that health and safety needs change throughout the year, and we also understand that mitigation efforts at times have to be tweaked. And so it's important for the teams to be having those conversations. Next slide, please.
Yes, I'll take this, right, Nick?
Yep.
Okay. So we all have aspirations, hopes, and dreams, areas in which we'd like to grow, and things that we want to need. And the person-centered plan should reflect all of these things. In addition, the plan, as you move through these conversations, you'll begin to identify outcomes. And these outcomes are those things that will need, the individual will need to be supported in order to achieve, correct? What's so wonderful about the integrated STAR is that so I often think about outcomes too as challenges that the person may have. And these are all linked to those things that they may want in their lives. The integrated STAR provides you with a tool to consider the particular challenge and then look at and consider all the resources available to the person that they might utilize to address those challenges or those outcomes. And it first begins, and I love this in particular, is that it first begins with the person's strengths and assets. What does the person bring to the equation? They have a vision for their life. What strengths, what skills do they already have that is going to facilitate the achievement of their vision for their life? And then we look at relationships. What relationships? Familial relationships, friends, neighbors. But believe it or not, mere acquaintances can bring a whole lot to a person's life in the achievement of their goals. Thirdly, we want to consider technology. Technology, oh my gosh, where would we be without it? And what role might that play in supporting the person in their life? Then we consider community-based resources, and community-based resources are those resources that are available to everyone and anyone. You don't need to meet criteria to be eligible for them, and they exist everywhere. And what might exist that could support the person elsewhere in their life. And then finally, we consider the eligibility-based services, and DDA falls there. And of course, these are critical and are important, but we want to consider all of these resources when we look at the challenges, when we're looking at the outcomes and trying to find solution around them and to support the person as they move through their life. In the end, the goal of the pre-planning process is for the person-centered plan team to support the person to identify what is important to them, for them, and then to identify and develop outcomes and resources to assist them in meeting their goals, their life goals, and most importantly, truly to create a good life. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Marianne. Here we've linked to a bunch of different resources that are also linked in the actual standard operating procedure. But I think also when you guys are looking at using these resources and when teams are utilizing them, I think it's important to remember that the pre-planning is going to look different for people, right? It's not going to look the same for every single person on your caseload. People are going to want to have different conversations. Some tools are going to work better for some people, and other people are going to need different tools for them to be able to make choices about their life. But I think Marianne just summed it up really well. The pre-planning process, that 90 days, is such a fantastic time for the team to really come together to make sure that blueprint is reflective of what the person wants and needs and is a blueprint for them to achieve their good life. Next slide.
Thank you, Nick. I think now we're going to open it up to questions. I think the integrated start slides helps too on how, DDA is not the only resource. We're a very little resource. Everything else revolves around our community, our friends, technology, relationships, the person's abilities. And so DDA is one smart part of meeting that person's needs. So I do have a couple of questions. I'm going to start with Marianne, and then I'm going to go to Nick. Marianne, in the chat, we have guardians choose not to have the person in their own PCP meetings. The CCSs have allowed this to happen. How does this jive with the person being at the center of these meetings?
Thank you, Patricia. Yeah, wonderful question. Wonderful question. I think there are conversations to be had with the guardian, and I think other team members about the importance of the person being, the necessity of the person being in the meeting and driving that meeting, because after all, it is about the person. It's their life and it's their plan. And but I think the conversations, I think a plan to have conversations with team members, how to bring the guardian on board with that. Yeah.
Thank you, Marianne. Nick, a couple of questions. One of them is the expectation to request all the services a person will need at the time of the person-centered plan, or request services as needed ongoing? For example, if a person is currently funded for CDS, Community Development Services, and is having their person-centered planning meeting today, and they're planning on being employed in 6 months, do they request the ongoing supports funding today, or do they wait later?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and I think that's a question that comes up a lot, right? There's obviously the annual planning process, and what we really want and what we've really encouraged is for the team to use that pre-planning and to use that annual plan to make sure it's a reflection of what the person needs or wants over the next year, and to ensure the services that are needed are authorized. You know, there are certainly things that pop up in the year, and that may be a health and safety issues, or maybe critical needs, or there's changes, and then certainly go through the revision process to make sure those are reflected. But we really want that initial annual PCP to really be a reflection of what that person needs and wants throughout the year.
Thank you, Nick. If there are services that the individual wants and identifies that are not part of the waiver or cover under insurance or available in other generic resources in the community, how will the state facilitate the person getting access to them since state-only funding has been cut? And this could be Nick or Rhonda. I know that, Onesta, you're going to touch on this, but let's try Nick first.
Well, you know, I think that I'm going to talk a little bit about that resource identification, right? And I think you hear it a lot out of sometimes the region where we say, what other resources have you looked at? What other community resources have you identified? And I think that's the critical piece here, right? And I think Marianne touched on it beforehand, that we really need to help do our due diligence, and at the CCS level, really looking at those community resources that are available. And if necessary, there are times where the region can help identify some of those resources as well within the community. Again, you know, DDA is not and cannot be the only resource for individuals, and that we have to look at those other state, we have to look at those other community family resources as we're going through this process. That's another benefit of the pre-planning, to make sure that teams are having those conversations about need and researching and identifying resources in the community ahead of the PCP development.
Thanks, Nick. I want to move on because we have a lot to cover, but I do want to ask one more question, and this one is from Marianne. And the question is, are the Charting the Life course tools copyrighted, or are they free to us?
They are copyrighted, but they are free. And if you visit, and actually in our list of resources, we do provide you the link to those tools, the Charting the Life Course Nexus website. So they're available to you to print down and use.
Thank you, Marianne. Okay, let's move on to the next chapter. And what we'll do is, if we have enough time at the end, we'll go back to some of the questions in this section. Go ahead. Linda.
Good afternoon, everyone. Okay, next slide. Okay, now we're going to talk about the development of your person-centered plan. So the CCS develops in collaboration with the individual participant and their PCP team, the PCP that reflects the participant's outcome, their identified risk and rights restrictions, their needs, and their requested services. It's important to understand that this is a roadmap for the next year, leading an individual towards their good life. Next slide. So the first part of that PCP that will come out of the pre-planning is the outcomes. So the outcomes are based on what the individual wants and needs, and then they define the outcomes. They are the goals that the person sets for themselves, and they're defined from the participant's perspective. This should reflect a not a service life, but a holistic life, like we've talked about, where we have all of the resources looked at. The team is not only to provide the needed supports, but also to help the individual find natural supports and other contributing resources to support the outcome of the person. The outcome should be associated with each authorized service in the PCP. And again, it should support a community life rather than a service life. The outcome truly is the definition of what the person wants to happen as a result of the supports that they are asking for, and should include areas such as relationships of meaning, their jobs, and gaining and holding status in their community. Next slide, please. The next area is the service authorization. In the service authorization is where you actually have the requested DDA funded services that are noted in the PCP detail service authorization section. These services are to be considered on a month-to-month basis, and you should be projecting for the whole annual year. So that would be from the person's annual date until their next annual date. Once those services are entered into the authorization section, they are forwarded to the provider, and this is the service referral. The provider has 5 days to accept or decline this referral, and then the PCP comes back to the CCS to review again and submit to the regional office. The PCP also includes a section for PCP related documents that can be uploaded into this system. So any kind of documentation that you would want to include to justify the need for the service should be included in that document section. Next slide, please. One of the documents that should be included is the DSTAT. This was created to improve and expedite the planning and development process. This is completed by the providers, and it's going to propose the services that the provider would like to give to the individual. It talks about the amount and the duration and the support the participant is to get to help them achieve their goals and meet the assessed needs and preferences. The provider agency submits this completed form to the participant's CCS, and then the participant and the team would review those services and decide whether they would like to receive those services from that provider, or if they want to choose different services that may best fit their needs. Next slide. In that tool, we also want you to note any COVID-related personal supports. There is a section on there that says personal supports Appendix K add-on. That section would be checked, and then any personal supports that would be asked for related to COVID-19 would be added onto the DSTAT at that place. And they would then be included and sent in with the PCP so that the regional office can review that and approve those services. If somebody has those already approved, you still want to make sure and check those if they are going to be a continuing service. So then you would combine the Appendix K hours with the normal hours, and you would add that together, and that would be noted in the service authorization area as the combined number of hours of service that the individual would receive. The providers, again, have 5 business days to review and approve that service so that that can be submitted back to the CCS and submission to the regional office. Next slide. The other form that needs to be uploaded in the document section is the cost detail tool. This is required for all PCPs, whether they be initial, revised, or annual PCPs, to ensure that the continued PCIS-2 service authorization is continued. It's particularly important where there are changes made to the services that are billed in PCIS-2. In that cost detail tool is a justification page. Anytime that there are revisions completed that need to be completed, the justification page needs to have all the information in it. The justification section would also be filled out if there was an Appendix K request for personal supports. In the justification section, make sure that you describe the resources that have been explored, why they are not able to meet the need, and then how the services that you're asking for will reduce the risk of the health and safety issue that is being presented. You also need to demonstrate how these services are going to increase the community participation. Once the cost detail is completed, it will be uploaded into the PCP. This is completed by the provider providing the service, unless the person is self-directing, and then the CCS would complete this cost detail tool. Next slide, please. Because we are continuing to use two systems, LTSS and PCIS-2, DDA has developed several resources to assist CCSs, regional offices, and providers to understand how the two systems work together. These are a few of the listed resources to be able to look at the services and how they're provided in PCIS-2 and what they will look like in LTSS. Next slide, please. The PCP has been developed to consider some flexibility. So whenever you are having those pre-planning meetings and talking about services through the next year, it's important to consider things like, is this somebody who is attending school? If they are, will they need additional services in the summer on winter or spring breaks? Is it something that the services are going to decrease whenever school is in session? And those hours and changes can be added into the PCP whenever you're adding those services in. Employment also needs to be considered. We need a schedule of services for their meaningful day. Can those services can be authorized up to the maximum limit in the waiver on a weekly basis, but you need to look at a schedule and see what services are going to be offered when, and then plan accordingly so that there is flexibility in the schedule. Behavior consultation is another service that needs to have consideration. You need to consider if there is an annual review and are there going to be additional units needed for that review, or to write an updated plan, or does the person have emergencies that crop up at a certain time of year because that's when it's very bad for them. So you need to think about that as a team and consider that whenever you're adding in the number of hours of service that are needed. Next slide, please. Okay, residential services, dedicated hours for participants in need of dedicated hours of support for residential services such as community group home settings and supported living look very differently in LTSS than they do in PCIS-2. Dedicated hours are used in LTSS Maryland when a person needs more staffing supports than what is included in the shared service hours. Provider's overnight supervision model is either turned on or off based on the need of the individuals and the model that the agency is using. So when you were working in PCIS 2, everything was based on a matrix supervision level. And then we added on hours. We added on hours for awake overnight. We added on hours to take the shared hours so that people could have enough hours in the home to do what they needed to do independently. Where LTSS is done differently. In LTSS, the individual's house that has 1 to 3 people in it and awake overnight turned on or overnight supports turned on has 138 shared hours in the plan, in the rate. So there are no need for 1-to-1 hours whenever there's only one person in that house because they already have 138 hours. When you add 3 people into the house, there are still 138 hours in the home. So that is shared hours. But if somebody needs to go bowling, and you know that they go bowling every Tuesday night for 2 hours, and that is their independent time in the community, then you need to add in 2 hours every week for that individual to have one-on-one direct sports so that they can go and do their thing in the community. This also is based on somebody who may have a behavior plan and needs 1-to-1 services. So you would need to calculate how often they need that 1-to-1 services rather than the shared hours, and then add that on as direct support hours. There, person-centered plan development and authorization SOP that was developed goes into more detail about the direct support hours. And so you can look at that if you need some more clarification, or contact your regional office and they can help you work through that. Next slide, please. The development of a self-directed plan is exactly the same as anybody else's PCP. You're going to develop their PCP, and then you're going to go through the outcomes section, and you're going to put in the services section, and you're going to put in their important to and important for. There are a few differences, and one of those differences is related to the cost detail sheet. So participants using the self-directed delivery model annually are going to have a budget allocation that's based on the approved cost detail tool that's completed by the CCS. The cost detail tool will utilize the current rates for each service, including any cost of living increase, and that's built into the rate. So the services will be used by adding those services into the cost detail. You will get the increased rate with the cost of living, and that'll be the total budget that you will receive. Once the cost detail tool is approved, then you can take that amount and you can create your individual self-directed budget. That budget then also would be included in the document section of the PCP and submitted to the regional office for approval. In that self-directed budget, it's important that all of the services are noted. Participants can determine the staffing that they want to have covered and what that pay rate looks like, as long as it meets the reasonable and customary standard rates. The self-directed budget sheet for initial and annual PCPs cannot have individual and family-directed goods and services except for the staffing recruitment, because the individual goods and services are related on savings from your budget. And so an annual plan doesn't have any savings in it, and you would not be able to put additional individual goods and services in it. However, we do have the exception for the staff recruitment and advertisement. The staff self-directed budget sheet then is submitted, like I said, in the document section and submitted with the PCP to the regional office for review. Next slide, please. Again, this is a list of resources with the links that you could go to, and it'll give you additional information on each of these subjects. This is also included in the standard operating procedures. And you can find all of this on our DDA website on the person-centered planning page. Next slide, please. All right, so there are questions related to how do we switch from our old process, which was had service funding plans and modified service funding plans, to this new PCP process. So our service funding plan process ended on 10/15/20, and we are streamlining so that everything is through our PCP process. So our initial PCP is going to be what our service funding plan was. The service funding plan process is eliminated so that the PCP process is more streamlined and everything is in there. The initial PCPs are the mechanism that will initiate services once the waiver has been approved. So once the CCS is notified that the waiver has been approved, the initial PCP can be revised and submitted to the regional office for review. Once that is reviewed and approved, then the services will be able to start. We encourage then that the CCS facilitate that the PCP process while the waiver is being approved so that those revisions can be submitted soon after the waiver is approved and services then can start. When changes to the authorized services are needed, after the development submission review or approval of the initial PCP, you do the revision and submit that. Services need to be authorized urgently due to health and safety risk. You notify your regional office and get an emergency approval. You submit your initial or revised PCP within 5 days, and then the services will be able to be approved to start. Please remember to complete the justification tab for the initial PCPs. And again, the justification tab is on the cost detail sheet as a separate page. Next slide, please. So modified service funding plan process, that ended on 10/15, and we now have streamlined so that the PCP process is the process that you get any of your changes through. So any changes to the authorized services are now completed via the PCP revision through LTSS. When you are completing a PCP revision, make sure that you complete the box that pops up and says, why are you revising this PCP? If you can be specific in that box and say that you are reducing services, adding new services, changing from CDS to supported employment, that will show up on the summary page of the PCP and assist the regional office in locating the changes that will need to be made. Also, make sure that your effective date is 20 business days after the day you submit the PCP. Because when you submit the PCP, it takes the regional office 20 business days to review, process, and approve the PCP. Again, if you have an urgent need that is related to health and safety risk, you would notify your office, your regional office, and get the emergency approval and submit your PCP revision within 5 days of that emergency notification. There's been a lot of questions regarding how the justification on the PCP revisions works. So on the updated cost detail tool, there is a justification tab, and that needs to be completed for initial and revised PCPs. The provider will fill this out if this is an initial service, and the team should have discussions regarding how to meet that need. It should reflect the person, the needs of the person, and the authorized services should reflect how those needs are going to be mitigated. Similarly, there have been a lot of questions regarding what documentation is needed to be uploaded to further support the justification. The answer for this really is not black and white. It really depends on a case-by-case basis. But the documentation provided should complement the justification, help paint the picture of what the need is. So if you are requesting behavior support services, you would have incident reports or documentation from the family regarding things that have been happening and why you would want to add behavior support services to the plan. Matrix scores sometimes were requested through the MSFPR process in some regions, and in some regions they were not. At this point, the matrix requests will all be done through a designated email box at each of the regional offices. The matrix score, when you're requesting a new matrix score, you need to be able to provide the documentation that shows why there's an increase in the need and submit that with the requests for the matrix. If you are unsure of what that email address is, please reach out to your regional office. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Donna. Thank you, Linda. Really appreciate it. Oh my goodness. So can I just tell you, as you were talking, we must have gotten 35 or more questions on this section. But as you continue to talk, Linda, I think you answered some of the questions. Please note that every question you submitted is very important to us. And so we are going to populate all the questions and provide answers and post them on the DDA webpage, because they're all really, really good questions. And we're not going to have time to read all 37 questions that we got just in this section. So I'm going to read about 4 or 5 of them, and then we'll continue to the next. And please know that we're trying to answer all the questions that you have through the presentation. So as questions were coming up, I'm not reading them if Linda answered them as she was presenting. And there's some really excellent questions that you have. So I'm going to start, Linda, with since the modified service funding plan is no longer, will the plan be approved quicker after making the necessary revisions?
So the regional office has 20 business days to approve a PCP, and that is the same amount of time that was allotted to review an MSFPR. So the regional office will utilize the 20 business days to review and approve the PCPs.
Okay, since all requests are now being done through an annual PCP, if an individual changes his or her mind about services after the plan has been approved and is requesting another service, will the team need to meet for another PCP update changes or not? And how often can changes requests be made within a year? And then somebody wanted to know, when do they actually need to do an annual PCP? So can you address that?
So your annual PCP is based on the annual date that the individual and the team agreed on. So you will have in your PCP an annual date. That annual date is the date that the plan is to be approved for your next annual cycle. So you want to start your pre-planning 90 days out and then submit that plan to the regional office 20 days before your annual plan is to start. If there are changes that need to be done to the PCP related to service, yes, you do need to have a team meeting The team needs to complete all of the documentation needed for a PCP revision, and that will need to be submitted to the regional office.
And then there's several that came about to say, well, what happens if the regional office is still reviewing and we can't update because we haven't gotten the what's already pending? What do you recommend that they do?
So if you have submitted a PCP and there's already a change and it hasn't been reviewed, I recommend that you send an email to the regional office and ask them to send it back as a clarification so you can make those changes prior to the review.
And for people in self-direction, where should they put the details about the staff, the vendors, hourly rate for personal supports into the detailed service authorization?
There are service lines that can be populated in the detailed service authorization. They cannot put the FMS in there, but they can put the support broker, they can put individual, or the personal supports can go in there. Any of the employment services can go in there. Respite can go in there. So anything that is an identified service should go into the detailed service authorization.
Thank you. There is just a lot of questions in the chat box in reference to your section. So are you submitting the PCP twice then, or submitting a PCP with a cost detail and submission of PCP? There's also lots of questions about, is the cost detail have the same rates as the detailed service authorization, and what is the difference between the two?
So the cost detail rates are the rates that we are currently paying for the services that are being paid out of PCIS2. Those rates at this point do not match the rates that are in LTSS, which is where the detailed service authorization rates are. Now, we are paying for personal supports and supported living out of LTSS at this point, unless you are in Central, and then those payments will start in December 1st. And those rates are in the cost detail sheet and should also match. I don't know if they match the cost detail sheet.
Okay, thank you, Linda. Really appreciate it. We have a lot to continue on, so we're going to continue on to the next chapter. But please know that we are going to populate all your questions, provide answers, and then post them to the DDA website. And each of you who register for today's webcast will actually get the information. We have about a little bit over 154 people, so we will make sure that you get the answers to the questions. So next slide, please, Donna. Honesta. Honesta, you may be in mute if you're talking. And let's go to the next slide, Donna. Great. Honesta, we'll wait for you. Okay, let's do, Rhonda, can you pick this up until Honesta can join us with her mic?
Yes. Sorry, Patricia, I was just responding to a few questions. So let's talk a little bit about the PCP approval process. And this approval process includes the service referral, acceptance from the provider, the participant or their legally authorized representative's approval, the CCS's approval, and the final approval of the PCP by the DDA. The PCP approval process requires all parties that are involved in the development and implementation of the plan to review and agree to the contents of the PCP, which entails the participant's vision, goals, and support service-related outcomes, frequency, scope, and duration of services, and more. Next slide, please. In terms of the provider approval process, a service referral for the service that the provider is being asked to provide is submitted through LTSS. This request is sent to the provider for their review and acceptance of the proposed services as documented in the detailed service authorization section of the PCP. Remember, Linda shared with us that the detailed service authorization tool is used to help. Anesta, is
Hi.
that you?
Yes, can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Yes, we're on slide 34.
Okay.
I'll turn it to you.
Okay, I am so sorry. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Okay, the PCP approval, slide 34. Okay. So, a service referral essentially is a request that is sent to the provider for their review and acceptance of the proposed services as documented in the detailed service authorization section of the PCP. The service referral details the frequency, the scope, duration, and cost of the agreed upon services for the provider's review and acceptance. The provider's acceptance of the PCP essentially is their approval and agreement of the notice services and should be accepted within 5 days of the request. When the provider accepts the service referral, the system will generate and save the provider signature page in the PCP signature section of the plan. If the provider declines the service acceptance, a decline reason should be noted by the provider in the system to assist the coordinator of community services with facilitating further discussions with the team until agreement or changes to the plan are made. Once resolved, the coordinator of community service will submit another service referral for the provider to review and accept. Service referrals via LTSS Maryland system are not required for self-directed services participants. SDS participants and or their authorized representatives, as well as the coordinator of community services, essentially will review and approve the PCP. Next. In addition to obtaining the acceptance of the proposed services from the provider, it is very important to obtain the participants' agreement. The CCS will review the PCP, provider's proposed services, scope, and frequency with the participant and their legally authorized representative, if applicable, to determine if the PCP clearly outlines their vision, goals, and supports, including natural, community, and state-funded supports. If approved by the participant, the CCS will facilitate obtaining the participant's agreement on the participant's signature page, and it will be uploaded into the signature section of the person-centered plan. If approved by the legally authorized representative, the agreement is noted on the authorized representative signature page, which is uploaded into the PCP signature section of the plan. However, if the plan is not approved, the CCS will facilitate further discussions with the team until agreement or changes to the plan are made, including selecting different services or providers. For self-directed services participants, the CCS will review the person-centered plan, the cost detail sheet, the self-directed services budget sheet, the waiver services agreement form, and other pertinent information with the participant or their authorized representative to obtain the necessary approval of the person-centered plan. Once approved, the participant signature page and or authorized representative signature page will be uploaded into the signature section of the plan. Next. The coordinator of community services signature is required and indicates that they have facilitated the development of the plan. They have informed the participant of their various rights, and they are in agreement with the person-centered plan. Prior to the CCS submitting the PCP for DDA's approval, the CCS will conduct a final review of the plan to ensure that it meets all DDA requirements. The PCP checklist should be utilized during the review process. Next, once the coordinator of community services signs the person-centered plan, it is then uploaded into the signature section of the PCP and submitted to the regional office for review and approval. Please note that annual plans must be submitted no later than 20 business days prior to the PCP annual plan date. Initial and revised plans should be submitted within 10 business days or less. Next, regional offices program staff receive, review, request consults, request clarifications, and approve initial, annual, or revised person-centered plans through LTSS Maryland. Once the PCP is received, the regional offices will review the person-centered plans, and this is traditional and for self-directed people in self-directed services within 20 business days, utilizing the PCP checklist to ensure all the necessary components of the plan are completed accurately. Other essential documents and tools that will be utilized during the review process to authorize services and determine and assess needs are the DDA Service Authorization Guide, the current Medicaid waivers, relevant policies, the Detailed Service Authorization Tool, as well as the Cost Detail Tool. Next, program staff will verify that the required Detailed Service Authorization Tool is uploaded into the PCP and that it accurately reflects the Detailed Service Authorization section of the plan. Staff will also verify the submission of the Cost Detail Tool for services that are being billed in PCIS-2 to ensure accuracy with the rates, matrix score if applicable, start and end dates, and whether the selected provider is licensed or certified to provide authorized services. Service and hours, we will also look at services and hours to ensure that they are correct and that they are justification for needs for increases and decreases in services. For traditional services that are currently being billed through PCIS-2, staff are also reviewing the correlation between LTSS Maryland Detailed Service Authorization and the services in PCIS-2 to verify services are authorized per guidance. Next, for participants with a change in either services or needs, program staff will review if there is a documented assessed need that indicates a variance in current staffing supports from what is already included through the matrix score or PCIS-2 authorization. For participants new to traditional services, the regional office will review whether overnight staffing is needed, and if so, whether shared hours can meet the current needs. Next. If needed, the regional office program staff has the option of requesting internal consultations or external clarification requests with coordinators of community services. Internal consultations can be made by program staff to obtain additional information pertaining to behavior support services, nursing, or just to ask a program-related question. Clarification requests are made to CCSs to clarify or make necessary changes to the person-centered plan, and it must be addressed within 5 days of receiving the request. Once the PCP meets the approval criteria, approval will be finalized in LTSS Maryland. If there is a change to authorized services, new or revised, in PCIS-2, the cost detail tool will be processed for entry into PCIS-2, and the provider will receive a PCP approval letter along with the approved cost detail sheet. Next. The self-directed budget allocation, as Linda mentioned earlier, are based on the traditional service rates and outlined in the cost detail tool. The cost detail tool for people in self-directed services will also be reviewed to ensure accuracy with the PCIS-2 rates, as well as to review the matrix score if applicable, start dates, and to review the requested services and hours. So once the PCP and the associated cost detail tool are reviewed and approved, people who self-direct their services must then create their self-directed services budget sheet and submit it to the regional office for our review, approval, and for fiscal processing. Once the plan has been finalized and approved, an approval letter will be disseminated along with the approved plan and budget to the Fiscal Management Services Agency. Next.
So Nesta, I have a couple of questions for you here. Some folks are asking about if the person the services that get approved, how will their appeal rights be communicated to the person and the team, and will the process be revised now that they don't have to submit the modified service funding plan request?
So a letter with appeal rights will be given to, will be disseminated to the participants for anyone whose services has been denied.
So in essence, the process has not changed and it's still the same as it has been for the last 3 years or so, correct?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
we will continue to share appeal rights.
All right, and I think people are having a question about emergencies, last minute changes. How do they, and I know Linda talked about this, but they asked it like 4 times in different ways. Well, how does a person add an emergency service to their plan?
So then it's important to work with the coordinator of community services to submit a revised plan in order to capture the emergency service request that is needed.
Thank you. Let's go to Kim so that we can bring this home and then see what we can do with questions towards the end, being that we are getting close to 2:30. So let's do Kim. Next slide, please. Next slide.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm going to be discussing authorization here. All DDA services require authorization and approval, which is also known as a determination. And determinations are based on the person's person-centered plan and their assessed needs based on service descriptions, requirements, and any limitations, as you heard from the earlier presenters in the pre-planning, development, and approval sections. We really want to emphasize what goes into the authorization of a PCP. These determinations are required for all PCPs, whether they are initial, revised, annual, or emergency. The justification of the assessed need is a central component to the authorization. Next slide, please. A critical element in the development of a well-crafted PCP is the justification. You've heard previous presenters talk about a blueprint or a roadmap. I think another good analogy here is to look at the PCP as a recipe for the person's good life. In preparing that recipe successfully, you need to think about, research, and obtain the right ingredients before you can prepare the recipe. So a quality person-centered plan must be comprehensive and assure that the person's assessed needs are met by the plan so that they can achieve their goals and their objectives toward their chosen good life. A justification is the action of showing something to be right or reasonable, and that's really what we want to key on. We want to be sure that what's being requested is reasonable, that it makes sense, and if your mother looked at it, she would agree. In order to support a PCP, it is important to assure that adequate time has been taken to assemble appropriate information to support the PCP. This can be accomplished through obtaining copies of assessments and/or data that are current and accurate. Next slide, please. So some of the areas we would be looking for: behavior support plans and data. And as an example, if a person has a behavior support plan to address self-injurious behavior, there should be data that tells you when the behavior is most likely to occur, how frequently it occurs, and what is identified in the plan to reduce the frequency and duration. Does it happen when the person is told they can't have something, or that something they expected does not happen? Are they trying to communicate something that is not understood? Or maybe they can't sleep and they're exhausted. This specific data will help determine the additional specific supports that are necessary or justified to improve the person's health and safety. Some other things: a review of requested services, whether they can be provided in the requested DDA waiver, obviously a critical element, the desired site, and any shared hours that may benefit the person. Data from any current plans that typically require more specific supports, things like sleep charts, toileting charts, behavior interventions, as mentioned earlier. Any assessments that have been completed, such as occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech evaluations, behavioral evaluations, psychiatric evaluations, forensic evaluations, medical evaluations or reports, and things like that. Medical discharge documents and other medical records pertinent to health and safety. Incident report data. What other viable non-DDA services or resources have been looked at? Next slide, please. Specific service authorization is based on the service description and specific criteria identified in the guidelines for service authorization and provider billing documentation document. So these guidelines have been updated. This was in order to do a couple of things. One, to update the language, and also to remove the rates, which are now instead posted on the DDA website at the links noted, which are current rates in LTSS Maryland and PCIS2 FY 2021 rate tables. Next slide, please. The amount of service that is authorized is based on the following: any service-specific limitations found in the selected waiver guidance, whether the requested cost is a typical or customary cost, whether the requested cost is reasonable as justified based on the assessed need. Some services will also require a determination of whether the requested service is the most cost-effective service that can meet the assessed need. And also, please remember that Medicaid will not reimburse for services provided that do not include a documented service authorization. Next slide, please. So here are some helpful hints. It is important to remember the information assembled should be reviewed and evaluated before inclusion with the PCP. And as you've heard several times today, that planning for the PCP development should start 90 days before the plan date. And pages of toileting charts, behavior charts, sleep charts are not helpful without review, analysis, and recommendations for services and supports that are needed by the person. We have in the past received pounds and pounds of data that no one looked at, and in some cases the information actually was submitted upside down, backwards, clearly had not been reviewed. That will not help in the review of the plan. Sheer volume of data sheets without clear support of the requested goals and supports will likely lead to either a request to clarify or a denial of the PCP. Next slide, please. The format and quality of the information is critical as well. A physician's note on a notepad is not adequate to justify a request for awake overnight staffing. We have in the past received a doctor's notepad saying 24/7 staffing required. That was not acceptable. Formal assessments that are complete, current, dated, and signed by a qualified reviewer or clinician are needed to support a request for additional services and supports. And Medicaid, once again, just a reminder, will not reimburse for services provided that do not include a documented service authorization. Questions?
Thanks, Kim. I think what we're going to do is go to the summary section, and then we'll open up for questions. Is that okay, Kim, just for the sake of time?
Absolutely.
All right, thank you, Kim. Let's go ahead and summarize, Rhonda, and then let's open it up for what we have left. But please assure that we are going to respond to every question in the question box. Go ahead, Rhonda.
Thank you, Patricia. So, today we've talked about a lot of information. So here's some key things just to keep in mind as you review the PCP development and authorization guidance and other resources we shared today. We place people at the center of planning a vision for their personally defined good life. This is done through that robust person-centered planning, and the process always begins with and is about the person. And Marianne and Nick shared information related to that. Next slide, please. The CCS, as the agent of the person, is the person who must assure that the team works closely with the person, agency staff involved with the person, family members, and any knowledgeable involved clinical staff. The CCS does this by facilitating and ensuring appropriate planning for an initial PCP, the identification of needed services and supports. Efforts are made to acquire the appropriate data, assessments, and other information in advance of that annual PCP meeting, and reconvenes the PCP meeting if needed to request additional services and supports based on a change in the person's need. Remember, we want to do robust planning for that initial and annual plan for the whole entire year. Next slide, please. The CCS begins with a person for an annual PCP meeting 90 days ahead of the meeting, or at that point when it becomes clear in working with the person and their team that additional services appear to be essentially and critically necessary at that time. Next slide, please. Providers. Providers need to be active participants in the PCP pre-planning, development, and approval processes. It's essential to share data and information. Providers need to complete and share that data, assessments, the detailed service authorization tool, the cost detail sheets, and provider implementation plans with the CCS so that they can review that information, share it with the participant, and include it in the documentation section. Providers need to reach out to CCSs with any questions or concerns with those service referrals so that they can be facilitated and completed timely and not have to be redone. Providers need to accept or decline the service referral within 5 business days. Next slide, please. The DDA website includes various guidance, resources, webinars, and tools, including a dedicated person-centered planning webpage. We have included a link to our person-centered planning dedicated page at the top of the DDA website on our banner so you can easily access this information. It includes the revised guidance that we're talking about today, an updated revised guidance for service authorization and provider billing documentation, and also a revised cost detail tool that was revised. The DDA regional offices are available to provide assistance and technical assistance as needed, but please note we have a wealth of information and previous webinars on our website that really answers a number of the questions that we're receiving. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Rhonda. I want to be respectful of people's time, but there were some really good questions. And Kim, there was just one question about for the justification for the PCP. or for supporting evidence, who provides this, the CCS or the agency or the provider?
It can be any combination. The CCS should be pulling this information together, but it could even potentially come from the individual themselves or a family member. Most typically, it's going to come, I believe, from the provider.
Thank you, Kim. And there was another one. It was, should there be a summary included with all the data submitted to support the need for the request?
I don't know that there needs to be a summary of all of the data. It needs to be really clear what the recommendations are. If you've got good information with clear recommendations, I think that will stand well. If you would like to pull together information so that the team is fully aware of everything that's gone into what's being requested, I think that would be terrific, but I don't know that it would be a requirement.
Thank you, Kim. I do want to be respectful of your time. Please take your time in going over the tools that we've shared today. We were not able to cover everything in detail as we really would like to, but every link that you have in this PowerPoint presentation you can access, and it actually will be able to answer some of the questions that you're asking us in reference to the authorization, the approval, the planning, the difference between the cost detail and the service authorization, what are the differences. And so we are recording this webinar. We are going to post it on the website, and based on the information and the questions that we receive, we will look to see if we need to concentrate and do a specific additional training to gear specific to either providers or CCSs or self-directed participants on or specific topics. So I do thank you for your time and joining us today, and have a wonderful weekend. Thank you all.